My name is Michael Evans. I'm a history faculty member at Delta College, and I wanted to resume talking about my reflection on Pat Barker's novel, The Silence of the Girls. As I mentioned in the first part of this recording, historians sometimes get a little hot under the collar about historical fiction and how accurate historical fiction should be. Should the emphasis be on telling a good story, creating a great work of art, or on the other hand, on reflecting the reality of the history? And some reviewers disliked Pat Barker's use of modern language in her retelling of the story of the Iliad from ancient Greek mythology and poetry. My argument on this is that I think she deliberately uses modern language to make a point. Remember, of course, the Iliad is an ancient poem, 2,700-year-old poem, based on a myth, which, if it is based on historical reality, came from many centuries before Homer was writing it down. So there's a certain freedom then reinterpreting it, because it is not, quotes, real history. And also it's become such a major element of Western culture. There's been so many retellings of the Trojan War and of Homer's story of the Iliad that Barker is entitled to her own reinterpretation. And the modernity of her language, I think, really makes a point that she's comparing what goes on here to what happens to women in modern warfare. She reminds us that Briseis, the slave girl at the center of this argument between the two Greek warriors, was once a princess, and she begins the novel describing the sack of Briseis' city by Achilles and his warriors. Briseis has seen her family slaughtered by Achilles and is then forced to become not just his slave, but also to be raped by Achilles. And the fighting between Achilles and the king Agamemnon is fighting over Briseis as if she were a piece of property, which she is because she's been enslaved. So Barker uses languages such as calling the Greek army's camp, a rape camp. This is a term that was used in the civil war in Bosnia in the 1990s, when women were deliberately imprisoned and targeted in that conflict. Wars like Bosnia, like Rwanda, like the war in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there's been a large amount of sexual violence against women and violence generally against civilians. This appears to be not just one of those things that happens in war, but deliberately targeted violence in order to demoralize the defeated population. So Barker's use of modern language and modern imagery is there because she's making a point, she's making an argument. She's trying to recenter this story around the women, and she's trying to make us think that these things, about the fact that these things did not stop happening hundreds of years ago, they are still going on today. Now, finally, time and copyright permitting, I want to read a brief passage from the novel to illustrate how she recenters the story around women. There's a section where she describes Achilles hacking his way through the Trojan army and killing these Trojan warriors, and they're named. This would be standard practice in heroic literature of warrior societies, to name the victims of your hero, to say, Achilles is a great warrior, look at all the people he's killed. Now, Barker has Briseis name the dead Trojans, but also describe them, tell you something about them, rehumanize them. I met a lot of the women, many of them common women, whose names you won't have heard. And so I can tell you that the brothers Laugonus and Dardanus weren't just brothers, they were twins. When they were little, Dardanus' speech was so bad, his own mother couldn't understand him. What's he saying? She'd ask his brother. He says he wants a slice of bread, Laugonus would reply. You've got to make him talk, the boy's grandmother said. Make him ask for himself. But I was busy, the mother told me. I'd have been stood there hours if I'd listened to her. And Dryops, whose mother's labour lasted 2 full days. Me mam sent the midwife downstairs in the end. You go and get yourself a cup of wine, she says. I'll stop with her. And the minute the midwife was out of the room, she whipped the covers off. And I don't know what she did, but oh my God, the relief. 10 minutes later, he was born. Oh, the midwife says, I didn't think she was as close as that. Me mam just smiled. So she retells the stories from the point of view of the women, rehumanizes both the women and the dead men in the war with Troy. So I'm nearly out of time, so I'll stop there. Silence of the Girls, Pat Barker, great example of historical fiction with a purpose.